If they come for you, take this and run. Wherever you are, light it up, and I'll find you. I promise.
Chekhov's gun is a dramatic principle created by a playwright and short story author Anton Chekhov, who is considered to be one of the greatest writers in the world. It states that every element in the story must be necessary. Irrelevant elements should be removed. Elements should not appear to make false promises by never coming into play. That statement is recorded in letters by Anton Chekhov several times and has been a rule followed by many authors up until today. That principle states, one must never place a loaded rifle on the stage if it isn't going to go off. It's wrong to make promises you don't mean to keep. In that particular letter, he means the gun is a monologue that Chekhov deemed unrelated to the rest of the play. In another interpretation, the principle claims, remove everything that has no relevance to the story. If you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second and third chapter it absolutely must go off. If it's not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging there. If in the first act you have hung a pistol on the wall, then in the following one it should be fired. Otherwise, don't put it there. If it's not essential, don't put it in the story. Everything introduced to the plot must have a function. Any significant detail in the story should have a purpose in the overall narrative. The mentioned principle, read literally, could be interpreted as solely related to object, but it's not just that. It's objects, ideas, certain story parts, symbols, foreshadows, or even characters. Arcane's plot followed that rule flawlessly and obeyed its own internal logic while delivering implied, approaching revelations. Every single element in Arcane mattered. Every detail had its meaning, its role to play. Every mentioned word, every little frown any of the characters made, it played a role, paying tribute to Chekhov's gun principle. The principle also does not state that every single detail must be important. Some story elements function to create mood or describe setting. Yet events or objects inferred as significant should have this implied significance revealed. Over the years, we have seen many shows that fail to follow this rule. Game of Thrones being the prime example, introducing several plot points, objects, or story parts that never had any conclusion whatsoever. Arcane, however, mastered it, owned it, and even redefined it. In episode 1, Vander is dropping his gloves, a symbol of him abandoning the path of violence. It sets a tone for almost entire Arcane's storyline, fight between the good and the bad, aggression and peace, up and down. He does that right after seeing Vi, Powder, and their dead parents. His own revolution indirectly caused these deaths, which influenced him heavily and made him change his approach altogether by realizing if there's a chance at a peaceful solution, one should take it. In episode 2, we see the gloves again right around the time Vander is called the Peacemaker. He is persistent and consequent in his aggression-free approach. Vander's moment of realization later on is even paraphrased when Jace is looking at a deceased boy, a death he treats as his own responsibility, which causes him to do very much the same. To abandon the warpath he decided to follow by reaching for his hammer, and choosing the road that might lead to peace in the very last moments of the season. At the same time, Vi makes a very different choice. She picks up gloves and actively decides war and violence are her way to fix things, to fight Silco, to finish the conflict. She is done doing nothing. She is actively using the gloves while fighting. Gloves are the gun, symbol of violence, of inner struggle of characters like Vander, Vi or Jace, ones that matter when it comes to the narrative of the conflict. Those whose role was to either escalate it or tone it down. Gloves are dropped by Vander only to later on be picked up by Vi. Powder's been making bombs ever since her early childhood, and it not only defined her road from being her old self to becoming Jinx, but it also pushes the story forward several times. In the early episodes, bombs are a way to signalize there already is something a bit off about Powder, even when she is still just a child, even before the events of episode 3, and when her devices are still relatively small. She's obsessed with mastering them, but also making them a bit dangerous. Filling them with nails, for example, which is not something a child should ever be doing. Later on, Powder, using her self-built device, serves as story's point of no return and leads to a major blast that indirectly causes Vander's, Milo and Klago's deaths, leads to separation of the sisters, to Silco gaining control over Powder, and her eventually becoming Jinx. By the end of the season, it is also her rocket that's gonna, best to our knowledge, hit the headquarters of the council with everyone inside. Escalation of her bomb-making skill was a direct symbol of Powder slowly becoming Jinx. In the early episodes, Milo called Powder Jinx, which Vi initially dismissed, but which she also partially acknowledged in the elevator, foreshadowing their future relation. Bombs are the gun. Particularly the shock device Jinx has been working all through majority of Act 3 was shown serving one purpose only, to be aimed and shot by her towards the council as an act of grief. When 4 children from the Undercity caused an explosion in Jace's workshop, Marcus joined Sheriff Grayson in investigating it. They went to see Vander, with whom Grayson had a deal to maintain the peace between the districts. Marcus did not care about the deal, however, and pressured by the council, tried to look for the children on his own when the crime lord Silco approached him with a deal to turn a blind eye on some of his activities. A deal he took by accepting Silco's money and his support. Tragic events that followed led to Grayson's death, which caused Marcus to drop the money he received and blame himself for years to come. That blame was symbolized by a coin. Money Marcus accepted, covered in blood. Death he caused. Marcus kept up with his dealings with Silco. He was also eventually promoted to sheriff in their department, making him even more useful to Silco. Each time he wants to give that corporation up, he holds the coin to remember what led him to that point, what he lost. He dropped the money to later on keep it as a reminder of what he did, the guilt he is carrying around. After the very same explosion, Grayson, who had a deal with Vander, gave him a tube capsule so he can contact her whenever he finds someone who could claim responsibility for the explosion. Naturally, that tube was later on used by Vander, who decided to give himself up to spare Vi from doing so. In this case, that tube was the gun. In episode 1, Vi tells Powder a story of failures that did not break people but only made them stronger. How everyone at one point failed, yet it did not define them. She told her a story of her rabbit toy that got stuck too far up for her to reach. She kept waiting and waiting each day for the wind to drop it back down. That very rabbit represented everything that Vi has lost. A possibility of a calm childhood, her innocence the day her parents died. In episode 2 she got it reclaimed, only to pass it over to Powder, trying to provide for her everything that she once lost. In episode 3, however, after Powder's unfortunate misuse of a monkey bomb led to the tragic events that ultimately changed Powder into Jinx, Powder fell into an abyss, rabbit toy right next to her, symbolizing her moral descent. It wasn't the last time we saw that toy, however. In episode 8, during Jinx's visions, Caitlyn's holding the rabbit, clearly symbolizing Jinx's struggle and her feeling insecure about someone Vi could potentially love more than her. In episode 9, rabbit toy is attached to the chair that belongs to Powder. So it turns out, Jinx held on to that rabbit toy for years. In episode 5, right after Jinx's flashback to mention tragic events, a box falls down. Inside, there were things she kept, things that meant to show us there's still Powder within Jinx. The rabbit toy? A gun telling us that Powder is not entirely gone or else she would have gotten rid of it, and a flare that Vi once gave to Powder. Ultimate Arcane's Chekhov's gun tribute. Right before the final events of Arcs 1 last episode, Vi is about to go on a quest to save Vander. She's taking both Clagger and Milo with her, but not Powder.
You're all I have left. I can't lose you,
she says, leaving her behind. Before she does that though, she gives her a flare.
Wherever you are, light it up and I'll find you, I promise.
Powder held on to that flare for years, just like she held on to her rabbit toy. The idea that her sister could be somewhere out there, maybe alive, did not leave her even when told that Vi is dead. And upon finding out she actually is alive, feeling betrayed by Silco, feeling alone, heartbroken, she lights the flare up, which becomes most iconic, poetic, most remarkable Arcane scene. A moment we have all been waiting for. Jinx standing there crippled and damaged, perhaps not even believing that Vi will actually come, but surely hoping she might. Arcane does that in the most satisfying way. Vi does show up. They do share a tender moment of reconciliation, even if only for brief seconds, giving us what we have all been waiting for. Now imagine if the flare was never lit. How disappointing that would have been, what a waste. What if the flare was forgotten by the writers? But no, not by Arcane writers, who do everything to keep the show coherent, to keep the story logical, to provide only what is necessary, honoring Chekhov's gun storytelling method. There's plenty more details like that. Hidden symbols, minor mentions that gain importance later on, foreshadows, characters that are briefly introduced only to play a bigger part later on. For example, in episode 1, cupcakes are placed on the balcony. It's a tiny little detail that is easily missed, but it's not an accident it was there to begin with. Later on in the show, Vi, after having met Caitlin, will start naming her cupcake, claiming she's so sweet, like a cupcake, which slowly leads to them becoming closer, developing romantic feelings for one another. Caitlin will play a major role in Jinx's inner struggle, as she's gonna feel threatened by her, going as far as kidnapping her and pretending in front of Vi she cut off Caitlin's head very much Seven style, but instead making a cupcake and placing it on a tray. Cupcakes are shown right around the time Powder struggles to make a major jump, and they are placed on the balcony of the very building she is standing on, hesitating, heading towards a building none other than one belonging to the Kiramans, Caitlin's family. Again, this is just a tiny detail, but it's one that matters. They are not shown by accident, they serve as a foreshadow of her future obstacles. That is why Arcane has been this successful. It does not treat its viewers like they are short-sighted. They do not assume that we need every single detail explained and handed to us on a tray, if you will. They give us the benefit of the doubt, knowing that we will catch these details. That we will remember that Marcus's bloody coin symbolizes his guilt. That 2 brazen gifts to Vander will eventually be used. That a bomb Jinx is building will serve its purpose. That a flare, giving to Powder by Vi, will be lit. Thanks so much for watching, guys.